The magnificence of who you truly are is far greater than any fantasies you'll impose on yourself. We can't make a difference to the degree that we subordinate and infiltrate our own values with the values we've injected from people we put on pedestals. So as long as we subordinate to others, we cloud the clarity of our real mission.
How do you explain to people that in all likelihood, they maybe are living someone else's version of themselves and not their true version?
That guy's got a more stable relationship. That person's more fit. That person's more spiritually aware. Freud called that the superego, which is an injection of an outer authority's values into your life. And then you'll second guess your own hierarchy of values, attempt to live by somebody else's values, and then beat yourself up when you're being futilely pursuing something that's not really authentic to you as a feedback mechanism to guide you back to what is authentic. And then you'll beat yourself up and think, why can't I stay focused? Why am I not disciplined? Why do I keep sabotaging? Why am I not making things happen? And you're not designed to do because you're trying to be second at being somebody else instead of first at being you. Each of the symptoms in our body are feedback mechanisms. Physiologically, psychologically, sociologically, there are feedback mechanisms, homeostats, trying to help us maximize our potential in life. If we know how to interpret them and see everything on the way, not in the way, we use it wisely, and we don't have to be governed from the outside because we're self-governed from the inside because we're interpreting reality in a way that allows us to maximize our potential.
How do people start to recognize those things? How do you start to be aware of all of these things around you?
Every time we have an imbalanced perspective and our ratios of perceptions are imbalanced and we're seeing more positives and negatives, which create amygdala-driven impulses. We store that in our amygdala and hippocampus, which has been called the subconscious mind. And so all pairs of opposites is what real love is. Love is the growth factor when you finally realize that they're both there. They're constantly there, but we subjectively bias our interpretations of reality and only see one side at a time. Once we see both sides at a time, we're poised, present, purposeful, prioritized, and we're productive. And that's where our power is.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. John Demartini, the human behavior specialist, philosopher, and best-selling author. You are the founder of the Demartini Method, a personal transformation system empowering people to master their life and destiny. You've written 43 books that have been translated into 40 different languages and been featured in over 30 documentary films, with your research spanning 5 decades. You have said the vast majority of people live their lives trying to be somebody they're not, which leads to failure because they have not recognized and honored who they truly are. Dr. Demartini, welcome back to London Real.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you back. I still remember our conversation from last time. It was epic. And I want to jump in with a quote from you. And you once said, no matter how hard you try to empower your life, you still feel frustrated by your perceived lack of progress and achievement if you're unaware of your own values and you keep trying to live by somebody else's. John, this is such a powerful concept, and I'm wondering if we jump in there because I think so many people today feel lost. You know, people talk about my purpose and all these things. And John, in the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we've been bombarded via social media with everyone else's version of what we should be doing, much more than when you and I were kids, right? And I'm wondering, how do you explain to people that in all likelihood, they maybe are living someone else's version of themselves and not their true version?
Well, everybody, regardless of gender or age or culture, has an intrinsic set of values that they're attempting to live by. And it determines your perception, decisions, and actions. Therefore, your destiny. So tell me what the hierarchy of your values are, and I'll tell you how you're going to make decisions and move. You're constantly making decisions based on what you believe will give you the greatest advantage or disadvantage at any moment in time, based on what you're perceiving, and you're even perceiving and filtering your world according to those values. What happens, though, is sometimes people compare themselves with a law of contrast to other people. And they put sometimes people on the pedestal. They think, well, that guy's more intelligent, or that guy's more successful, that guy's more wealthy, that guy's got a more stable relationship, that guy's got, or gal has more social standing, that person's more fit, that person's more spiritually aware. The moment they exaggerate somebody else, because they don't know them, they're making presumptions, and exaggerate them, and then minimize themselves by contrast. The way values work in the society is whoever has the most power down to least power, values automatically go from greater power to least power. So they will inject those values into their life and then take those in. Freud called that the superego, which is an injection of an outer authority's values into your life. And then you'll second guess your own hierarchy of values, attempt to live by somebody else's values, and then beat yourself up when you're being futilely pursuing something that's not really authentic to you, as a feedback mechanism to guide you back to what is authentic. And then you'll beat yourself up and think, why can't I stay focused? Why am I not disciplined? Why do I keep sabotaging? Why am I not making things happen? And you're not designed to do, because you're trying to be second at being somebody else instead of first at being you. And the most powerful you is the authentic you, based on what's truly most important to you. But we don't honor that because we do comparisons. Imagine 3 little beakers of water. The middle beaker is 72 degrees, tepid. And one is 40 degrees, cold. One's 140 degrees, hot. If you put thermometers in there, they'll give you objective readings, 40, 72, 140. But if all of a sudden you put your hand into the 40 degrees and leave it there for a while and it gets cold, take it out and put it into the tepid, you will register that, and you, instead of being accurate in your assessment, you'll think it's about 90 degrees. If you take it out, let it go back to tepid, put it in the 140, and let it sit there and burn a bit, and then take it out and put it in the tepid, you'll think it's about 50 degrees. So your subjective bias, misinterpretation and distortion of your reality occurs the moment you do a comparison to something that's bigger or greater or lesser than you. So anytime you put something on a pedestal, you'll tend to minimize yourself. Anytime you put something in a pit, you'll tend to exaggerate yourself. And when we exaggerate and minimize ourselves, we're not ourselves. We're putting on a facade of pride or shame, aggrandizement or self-depreciation, instead of be ourselves. So therefore, we'll tend to set too big of goals in too short a time frame to humble ourselves, or too small a game for too long a time to build ourselves, to try to home us back in and to that authentic self. And every symptom we experience in our life is a homeostatic mechanism to guide us back to authenticity. And when we do, and we learn how to interpret our symptoms, all business symptoms, psychological symptoms, physiological symptoms, and guide us back to authenticity, we empower our lives. So what we do is we compare ourselves to others instead of compare our daily actions to what we value most.
Whew, that's heavy. And we're constantly getting feedback in the form of, I guess, pain in our lives to show us that we need to go back to authentic self.
Yeah.
And yet these days when we get pain, we're told to take a pill or watch some movies or buy some stuff. I mean, is it true a lot of times we don't honor or recognize these markers that are trying to show us to go back to authenticity?
We're not trained in applied physiology, so we're not learning that each of the symptoms in our body are feedback mechanisms. If you go out and you pig out and you overeat, and you wake up stuffed, you feel fatigued, you're having difficulty breathing, maybe you have a nasal congestion, you have cramps and bloat and flatulence or something, you go to the medical doctor, and the allopathic physician will give you a pharmaceutical because they're pharmaceutical reps. So you get all these pharmaceutical for it. And then they'll suppress that and palliatively suppress that, and now you feel better, so you go out and continue to do the foolish act. But really, all of those symptoms are feedback mechanisms. If you know how to read the autonomics and the physiology, it's a feedback mechanism to guide you to eat wisely. Because the second you eat wisely and moderately and rhythmically, your physiology is uneven, you're not aware of it, it's just flowing. So the symptoms are feedback. The psychological symptoms in our life are also feedback. And the sociological feedback is also there. So if we get puffed up and cocky, people tend to criticize us because we tend to narcissistically project our values onto them and expect them to live in our values, which is futile. So they tend to criticize and challenge us to humble us back into authenticity. And then we'll be addicted to, our amygdala wants us to be addicted to be proud, but what we're doing is we're actually needing those people to bring us back into authenticity where we are authentic. So the second we go down, have people lift us up. We go above, they get us down. Kind of like a resistance factor on the market when it goes up and an assistance factor when it goes down. We tend to, over or under. But nature is trying to get us back. So physiologically, psychologically, sociologically, there are feedback mechanisms, homeostats, trying to help us maximize our potential in life. If we know how to interpret them and see everything on the way, not in the way, we use it wisely, and we don't have to be governed from the outside because we're self-governed from the inside because we're interpreting reality in a way that allows us to maximize our potential.
You mentioned on the way, not in the way. This is one of your great phrases. So when we see something that looks like a problem in life, a lot of us, the first reaction, for everybody, is that's in my way, that's bad, that's a problem. But you're saying it's on the way, it's part of the journey. How do people start to recognize those things? How do you start to be aware of all of these things around you?
Can I share a story?
Please.
So I have a guy who asked for a consult. He owns a big company in Africa. And he was driving down the highway, the freeway. 4 cars came up and surrounded him. Guys with masks on came out with guns and machine guns and came up to his car and stopped him, banged out his window, unlocked the door, grabbed him, put a thing over his head and put him in the trunk. Okay, you would think that's a bit stressful.
Yeah, that's some feedback.
That's So he gets in the trunk and they drive for like 5 hours to the middle of nowhere. He had no idea where it was initially. And they basically said they want a very large sum of money. It's a ransom. And they've got the evidence that they've got their family and they're going to kill their family if he doesn't do this. Okay, this is pretty stressful, most people would think, right? So he goes there and he ends up having to get the money. It takes him a period of time because he didn't have liquid cash. He had money in assets, but not liquidity, so he couldn't just hand him money. And he didn't want to not give him the money because these people would kill people. So he raised the money, took a few weeks to get it. He got the money together and paid him. He was let loose. He finally made it home. He got back to his family. He's under post-traumatic stress diagnosis. He's got all this stuff going on. And somehow somebody led him said, have a consult with John, right? And I have a different angle on things. So I said, it's okay, let's go to the moment when you had the biggest stress. He said, when I got in that trunk, I could barely breathe. It had fumes. All I could think of is, I'm going to die. My family's going to die. What's going to happen? I was just in shock. I said, there's no way you can have tragedy without ecstasy. He goes, I don't understand that. The mind will always homeostate things and it will dissociate and create an alternative reality in order to compensate. So I want you to go to that moment when you're sitting in that car. And at that moment, get really, really present. And as he got really present, I said, your mind, you're perceiving right now fumes. So your mind will dissociate and create fresh air. If you're automatically thinking it's constrained, you'll imagine yourself representing freedom. Your mind will create a complementary opposite. So as he did that, he closed his eyes, he got really present, took about 5 or 6 attempts. He finally got really present. And he goes, wow. He got tears in his eyes. He said, I'm walking through a field and almost hopping through a field, holding hands with my children and my wife, and we're running through a field in fresh air, and there's butterflies and birds which represent freedom, and it's clear and sunny instead of dark, and I'm free in open space instead of constricted. And I showed him that his mind automatically homeostates things in order to survive. And all of a sudden, when he says, I see that my mind actually had ecstasy at the moment I had torture. I said, exactly. And he says, and now I'm having tears in my eyes, and I'm not frightened about the torture, and I'm not, it's like there's some sort of synthesis. I said, well, the moment you have a synthesis, this is a sympathetic stimulus, this is a parasympathetic stimulus, that put them together, you get a beta wave and you get a delta wave, you get an alpha wave. The alpha wave gives you a gamma synchronicity in the brain, and you get this aha and eureka moment, and you get tears in your eyes, confirming that you now see things as they are, not only one side. We tend to think that with a subjective bias that this is happening but this is also happening. But this is conscious, this is unconscious. The moment we become fully conscious, we have a state of grace. So he became fully conscious, and I went through frame by frame by frame through each of the moments he thought he was in trauma, and showed him what his mind did, and showed him how his mind balanced it out. And he was just calm, and he just sat there and he says, I don't feel the torture, I don't feel the trauma, I don't feel any of that. And then I said, now what was the benefit of being in there in that moment in the thing? He said, for the first time since I got married, I really, really appreciated my family. He said, I have been working like a dog, working long hours, focused on building a business, making lots of money and everything else. And I think I was just kind of going to the edge. I was getting feedback from my wife that if you keep going like this, we're going to be leaving. So he was sitting on the edge. He was intuitively knowing that, but he was not doing anything about it because he just felt cocky because he's proud of what he was doing and accomplished. He said, when I did that, I realized I really loved my wife. And I didn't know how much I did until that moment. I didn't realize that. Now, while I was in this situation and way from the business, I've been pushing everybody in business to try to get them to take command. But the truth was I kept interfering with it by robbing them of accountabilities, by this is how you do it and everything else. And they couldn't rise to the occasion. When I was away, all these people rose to the occasion and my business flourished more than normal. And they said, so I got my family appreciated. I got to have my business growing. And when I came back, I had lost a bunch of weight because they didn't feed me. I had hypertension, my blood pressure came down. Now I'm doing yoga, I'm spending time with my family and everything else. My business makes more money than it did. And I said, how much was the ransom? And I'm not going to tell you, and how much did it make? He said, I'm still profited after the ransom because I got out of its way. And he says, what was interesting is my intuition was letting me know I was on the edge of my marriage, letting me know I was on the edge of my health, letting me know I was on the edge of the frustration with the management of the business because I was in the way. And he said, right now, if it wasn't for those individuals that just ransomed me and hijacked me, I might be dead, I might be divorced, I might collapse my business. Right now, I have a feeling I'd like to thank those people. So he said, I said, well, then close your eyes and imagine them. And he closed his eyes and he said, thank you for giving me my life back. So we think, Stephen Wolfram, who's a mathematician, said that entropy and disorder is missing information. Claude Shannon said the same thing, and two guys from MIT talked about missing information. And order is reclaiming the information, seeing it, negentropy. And so we sometimes think we know what's going on with our subjective bias and we have opinion, but we're actually missing information. He was missing information when he was labeled post-traumatic because he was seeing only one side, the trauma. When I showed him the other side of the information and put the two together and he had full information, he saw the hidden order in the apparent chaos, and all of a sudden he was in a state of gratitude because he realized that his intuition and his own unconsciousness was making sure this was the only way he could have done it. I said, could you have gotten that outcome? He said, I've hired consultants, I couldn't get that outcome. This is the only thing that I could do to get that outcome. Right now I feel gratitude. I said, now you've healed, there's no post-traumatic. He hadn't had any post-traumatic stress since then.
And yet today, John, everyone is using that word a lot. Trauma, trauma, trauma. I had trauma. Now we're treating the trauma, not with that method, with other ways. So it feels, and if you hadn't have done that, he would have walked around his whole life thinking about that incident as a traumatic one and probably would have lived his life in the past and maybe not even move forward.
Every time we have an imbalanced perspective and our ratios of perceptions are imbalanced and we're seeing more positives and negatives, which create amygdala-driven impulses towards, or the other one more conscious of the negatives, unconscious of the positives, more negatives than positives, and then we have now the instinct away. Anytime we do, we store that in our amygdala and hippocampus, which has been called the subconscious mind. It stores the information, and it's there for fear of predator and to seeking prey again. So it's storing to make sure we survive. It's a survival response, but it's incomplete. Because within the predator, there's opportunity. Within the prey, there's downsides. If a person has nothing but prey, food or whatever, and they're gluttonous and they're fat, and there's no predator, they'll get gluttonous fat and they'll lose fitness. If they get predator without prey, they'll get emaciated and starve without fitness. but you put the predator and prey together in a food chain and keep them in check. You'll eat just enough to make sure that you're fit, and you'll maximize your fitness and keep on the edge. So you must have maximum growth and development occurs at the border of support and challenge. And so all pairs of opposites is what real love is. The love is the growth factor when you finally realize that they're both there. And they're constantly there, but we subjectively bias our interpretations of reality and only see one side at a time. Once we see both sides at a time, we're poised, present, purposeful, prioritized, and we're productive. And that's where our power is.
Those 5 Ps you want to constantly have in your life. And that's why people say, oh, I'm gonna retire when I'm 65, and then everything's gonna be great. And they do that, and they lose maybe that predator instinct, and then they realize, I'm not happy with this.
I got a story, I got to share a story.
I love it.
So I was in Sydney, and there's a lovely lady there that has a company called Corporate Wisdom, and she works for McKinsey Corporation and Boston Consulting. And so they had this client. They said, John, can you come in and just kind of be with this client? I said, sure. So I fly up to Melbourne with this group, and we're sitting there, and I meet with 4 executives first. And it's a company that's a paper company and a forestry company, and they make all the paper pretty well in Australia. And the guys are talking there, and they said, well, you know, we've got a CEO. He's 63 years old. He's sort of fading and ready to retire. And the company is losing its edge. We were number 1, now we're number 4. And he's just not there. We either want to fire him up or fire him out and take over, because we know we can make this company go again. So one way or the other, let's get him fired up or fire him out. Can you help us? I said, sure. So we come in there, and I asked the guy. He finally came in, the executive, the founder. I said, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to tell me what you believe, what you assume is happening in the business. And whenever you hear dissociations and blames on the outside, you know it's all BS. So he said, well, the Japanese are doing this, and they're coming in at different price margins, and we can't do that. And this is what's happening in our market, and this regulation came in, and he gave all these things outside. And I said, now that the BS is out of the way, you've catharsed out the BS, I'm going to ask you a very powerful question. I said, what is it that inspired you to start this, found this company? And he looked at me and paused for a second, and he looked at the guys, and he said, when I was a boy, there was segregation between the rich and the poor, and the blacks and the whites. And I was in an area that all of a sudden desegregation occurred, and I had to get on a bus, and I had to go over to a really nice school. The very first day I went to the school, I was the only guy on the bus that didn't have new shoes, new clothes, new paper, new pads, new, school supplies. When I got to class, I felt, by the law of contrast, humiliated, rejected, devalued, out of place. I didn't want to be there. It was so humiliating that as I went through the day and felt completely squashed, I didn't want to get on the bus to go home. So instead of doing that, after everybody left, I walked around the entire school in all the trash cans, and anywhere where I saw paper or a pencil or a pen in the trash can, I grabbed them. I walked home with all the paper, and I cut the paper out and put a weight on it and kind of moistened it and heated it and put a weight on it and glued the end and made my own pad of paper. So I was not embarrassed the next day by having a pad of paper. I grabbed some pencils and I sharpened them. I washed my shoes. I had my clothes as clean as I could. And I went the next day so that contrast was less. I started this company because I didn't ever want to have a kid be put in that situation when they didn't have paper. When he shared that story, everybody in that room, including me, was in tears. The executives never heard the story. And all I said to him afterwards, I said, did you forget the kids? Did you get so successful that you depurposed yourself? Anytime you start to think you're successful, you tend to go to lower priority things. By the law, they call the moral licensing effect. You tend to go depurpose yourself to go to lower priority things to humble you from your pride, to get you back in authenticity. And if you don't do that and get back to authenticity, you lose the clarity of your mission. Forget the mission. Forget the reason why you're there. He said, I I lost my mission. I said, now make a decision. Do you want to fade out and you are fading out, or are you going to be inspired? And then he said, now I'm frightened. I said, what is the fear? He says, I've been giving an impression, even though my whispering intuition has been whispering to me, been an impression that I'm going to be home finally for my wife, because I basically sacrificed my family during these years. And he says, and I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid, I'm used to being in command. I'm afraid when I go home, I don't know who I am. And I said, well, retirement, there's nothing wrong with retirement as long as it doesn't get in the way with your work, your mission. He says, I bet if you went to your wife, I bet she's got anxiety too about you coming home, because you're used to telling people what to do, and she's not looking forward to that. And he says, well, that's definitely evident. He says, do you think you can talk her into maybe keeping your mission going, and maybe just scheduling some time to be with her and making it where it's a vacation or something like that? And he looked at me and said, I needed to hear that, because I've been basically programming that I'm supposed to retire at 65. And I said, and I don't even know where that came from, but it's there inside me somehow. And I said, well, have a conversation with your wife and make a decision. Are you going to be on board or are you off board? Because if you're going to be on board, let's take command and let's turn the company. If not, let's give it to people who are ready and eager and thirsty to want to take it. He made a decision to do it. In 3 months, the company was turning. In 6 months, back on top. It had nothing to do with the world on the outside. You know, it's all about the inside. And most people, I said in The Secret many years ago, when the voice and the vision on the inside is louder than all opinions on the outside, you begin to master your life. When we have intrinsic drive, which is part of an expression of our highest values, we are empowered and we're unstoppable, and we do incremental momentum building achievements that become a legacy building. But the second we go and try to let extrinsic systems become the false causalities of our reality, we automatically hold ourselves back from our greatness. And he got on track, back on track, because he remembered his mission.
Wow. So John, how do people get in touch then with that intrinsic mission, those intrinsic values, especially in a world that feels more noisy than it ever was? Is it noisier than it ever was? I think it is.
Well, there's so much stimulus we have access to, because you got a phone, you got a computer, you're in connection with the outer world so easily now. So yeah, we are bombarded by that. So of course, that's partly a choice. We could just turn the thing off and say, forget it, but that's hard to do for most people. I had somebody in my program this weekend, and he said, he put his hand up and he says, I don't know what I want to do. And I said, BS. I said, I've been doing this for 51 years. I said, I know better. Everyone knows what's inside them they want to do. Everyone knows. But they've got all these anxieties around it to make them lie to themselves about what they feel called to do. So I said, what do you do every single day? This guy's about 40, 45 maybe. I said, what do you do every single day that nobody has to remind you to do, that you spontaneously do, that you love doing? He says, I don't have anything like that. I said, what do you do every single day that you spontaneously do, that you love doing, that nobody has to remind you to do? He says, I don't know. I said, what do you do every single day that you spontaneously do, that you love to do, that nobody has to remind you to do? And he says, I spend a lot of time watching YouTube videos and reading on personal development. I said, that's probably what brought you to this program, isn't it? He goes, yep. He says, I definitely do that. I said, how long have you been doing that? He said, 25 years. And how many hours a day, probably on average, would you say that? He says, it depends on the weekend or day, but it's 2 to 5 hours a day. I said, now, I can tell you, nobody will accumulate that information without having a desire to disseminate it. Do you communicate with people around you and you constantly share that? He goes, yes, I do. I constantly go to that and try to help people. I said, now, there's 7 fears that block people from going out and telling themselves what they really want to do.
7, okay.
Yeah, 7 basic fears. One is the fear that I'm not intelligent enough, not knowledgeable enough. Because you're comparing yourself to other people that's been doing it longer, you think, well, who am I to do this? So you never get off the ground. But instead of looking at, you've got 25 years of doing this, and there's people out there that don't have that you could help in the journey, and those other people are going to die out someday anyway, and you'd be at the top if you did. But you're letting that stop you. The second one is that I might fail at it, or I might not succeed at it. And that's because you don't have a plan. You haven't sat down and organized a strategic plan and mitigated the risks with anticipation and foresight. And the third one is that I might not make money at it, or I might lose money doing it. And that's because you don't have a plan, again, to make sure you're meeting the customer's needs to do it, and use feedback systems to make sure you meet those needs and have a system for it. And then I said, well, what would happen if all of a sudden my wife doesn't want the insecurity of me taking on another job and taking the risk. So the fear of losing loved ones and the respect of loved ones can stop you. And he goes, yeah, you naming all of mine, all of them are sitting there. Then your fear of rejection, because all the other people that are doing well, they're going to, well, if I don't do it, then I'm a failure. And you're comparing yourself to other people instead of comparing your actions to your own dreams. And the other one is that you don't have the vitality and energy. Yeah, I'm 40-something, do I have the energy? Is it too late? And, do I really have the vital energy? But if you're not doing what you really love to do, your energy is definitely going to be drained. Your reticular activating system is going to make sure of that. And are you inspired by it? And he says, well, yeah, I'm inspired to learn this. I said, but you're afraid that if you do that, you'll break some morals and ethics or some spiritual authority that you've subordinated to, some dogma that you got from Aristotle and geocentric system or whatever. And he says, well, that's my wife and their family. And yeah, I'm afraid that if I do that, what would they think if I go into that field? I said, all of that is external. But inside your heart, you know what you want to do. And he just cried right on the spot. He says, I do know what I want to do. I said, so stop lying to yourself about you don't know. Because people say I don't know, and they're basically letting those fears override their vision. Now, if the voice and the vision is louder than all those things, you start taking action. So we can go and mitigate each one of those. Because at the end of your life, you're going to be asking, did you do everything you could with everything you're given? And you're going to be able to, you want to be able to say, absolutely. But if not, you're going to be sitting there and comparing yourself to people that did things, and then you're going to beat yourself up. So anyway, he came up to me afterwards, and he came up for signing of books last night. And he said, can I hug you? And I said, absolutely. He said, thank you for making me look at the truth. I've known this the whole time. And I said, I know. That's why I said, don't lie to yourself. He said, I've known what I've wanted to do, and right now, I'm not going to let anything stop me. I feel like right now I've got nothing to lose. Go for it. I said, great, that's what we're here for today. That's what this weekend was about, breaking through the limitations that we've imposed on ourselves because of misinterpretations of reality.
Wow. So everybody knows what they want to do, but those 7 fears basically make it to where you can't see it.
Well, one or more of those,
right.
Could be all 7. I was in London a number of years back, 10, 12 years ago maybe, and I had the lady, same thing happen. She says, I don't know what my purpose is, right? And I just went, I'm going to slap them around a bit because it's all lies. And I said, so what do you do every single day that nobody has to remind you that you're inspired to do? And she goes, I don't know. I said, what do you do? And I kept doing this 2 or 3 times. Finally, she says, I just spend time with my kids all day. I said, fantastic. So you spend most of your day with your kids. Yeah, they're with me most of the day. I said, you love being with your kids? She got teary-eyed. She says, I love my kids. I said, is that what your dream has been? She goes, but is that good enough? She said, I said, Rose Kennedy, her mission statement, because I got a book from the Kennedy family, and I'd had her actual mission statement written in it. It says, I dedicate my life to raising a family of world leaders. That was her mission.
Wow. I
said, so you're a mother, and right now we've got an economic need for children, because right now we've got a population issue. It says mothers are probably most assets on the planet right now. So if you're basically going out there and willing to go after being a mom and do it, she said, well, that's all I've wanted to do. I said, the only reason why you pretend like you don't know what you want to do is because you're comparing yourself to another woman out there that somehow is doing something different. So who is that? She goes, I think I know 2 of them. I said, what is it? I said, well, there's this woman who's got this major business. She's doing extremely well. She's not dependent on a guy, and she's got some kids, but she's got nannies and au pairs. She's got all these people taking care of it and specialists and stuff, and she runs this business. And I constantly compare myself to her, and I feel like a schmuck. I feel like I'm not doing anything. All I'm doing is taking care of kids. And I said, she has a hierarchy of values as business, and the kids are down below. And she's delegated those to lower, and she's become efficient because she's delegated lower part of things. So she doesn't have your set of values. Your values of children are at the top. So if you try to go against that, you're going to end up having internal conflict. She says, well, that's it. Every time I try to do something in business, some emergency comes and I got to go take care of the kids. I said, because your kids are most important. And then she has this other lady that's involved in philanthropy, and she's got a kid, but she's got a wealthy husband. And so she was comparing herself to somebody with a different set of values. And anytime you do that, you're destined to beat yourself up. Because you can't be. Anytime you try to live in other people's values, you have futility. Anytime you try to get other people to live in your values, you got futility. And that's designed to allow yourself to love what you do and communicate what you're excellent at in terms of what other people love to do, and respectfully dialogue with people and respect their individual values. So when she actually did that, she said to me, she said, so you're saying it's enough to be a mom? I said, is it not enough? It's the key of your heart. That's what you want to do. And she started crying. She had tears in her eyes, and she came up and hugged me, and she said, that's all I've ever wanted to do. But I've never been able to give myself permission to allow that until right now. Thank you for giving me that permission. I said, be the greatest mother you can possibly do. And you have dreams for your kids. She said, I have dreams for my kids. How do you know that your kids won't do something extraordinary on the planet? And because of your efforts, you built businesses, you built philanthropic things, you built all those things for your children. She dreamed, she said, that is my dream, to do them extraordinary kids. I spend all day long teaching them, educating them, inspiring them, doing them, making them, taking places, and everything else. I said, then honor your hierarchy of values and honor that you're a mother, an extraordinary mother. And we have few of those today. The people in the room applauded her. And I didn't ask for that, they just did it. And that was the perfect thing for her to get as a feedback, to honor that that's what her real calling was. So we go around, and some people are dedicated to family, some are dedicated to business, some are dedicated to spiritual quests, some are intellectual quests. All of them are necessary in society, and all of them are valuable in society, but we sometimes compare people in the success field only to business, only to finance. But the reality is, the people in business require those people working for them that have the different values. Yeah. And without that, we don't have a business. So we have to honor all the values and not put one greater or lesser, but honor all because they're all necessary. In fact, all businesses will automatically strive for androgyny to make sure they have a balance of the male and the female side. And if they don't, the business is skewed. So it's forcing people to get that androgynous mixture of value systems to make countercultural integration to make things maximize the potential.
They say comparison is the thief of joy. But you do need to compare to a certain extent, or you want to just never compare?
No, what you do is, what I do is I call it owning traits of the greats. So what I do is I say, okay, when you meet somebody that you admire, whatever you admire that you're too humble to admit that you actually have, or you wouldn't admire them. But you're too humble to acknowledge it because you're unconscious of it, because you're expecting it to be in their form according to their values instead of your form according to yours. But if you look inside your own values, you have it. You have excellence in your own values and your highest values, just like they do, but they have a different set of values. So you have it. So what you do is you go in there and ask, what specific trait, action, or inaction do I perceive this individual displaying or demonstrating that I admire most? Great, what is that? Okay, and you define it. And then you go, now, go to a moment, me, where and when I display and demonstrate that same behavior, same trait, action, inaction, and where was it, and when was it, and who did I demonstrate it, and who perceived me doing it? And once you own that and do it until it's quantitatively, qualitatively equal, and most people don't think they can do that, but I've been taking at least 125,000 people through that, and they can do it. Once they realize it, they realize, I don't need to envy them and try to imitate them. I already have what they have. They have it in their form, I have it in my form. Thank you to them for revealing what I had that was sitting, that I was too humble to admit, that it was hiding and dormant. Thank you for awakening inside me what it is that inspired me about you, which is actually what inspires me about me. Once they realize it, the playing field changes. Playing field changes. I'll give an example. So we had a lady who came to the Breakthrough Experience, the signature program. And she started doing that. She's a little pop artist, and she's trying to get her music out into the world, right? So she does Lady Gaga, and she does Madonna, and she has Beyonce doing this exercise. I call it owning the traits of the greats. And she goes in there and identifies everything that she sees in them and writes them all down that she's admiring. And then she goes and finds out and digs. And it took her months to do this. When she realized she had it, she noticed that her daringness and the way she presented herself and what she wore changed after doing Madonna. She noticed that when she did Lady Gaga, her voice tone and the intensity of the voice went up. And then when she did Beyonce, 2.5 weeks later, she was being advertised on a little bus in Los Angeles for a local gig that she was doing. And somehow Beyonce saw the bus and looked up the thing and listened to some music she had and contacted her and asked her to perform at her house in front of some very important people. And so she contacted me. She says, I did the method on Beyonce, and 2.5 weeks later after doing that, all of a sudden I'm asked to perform at her house. I said, at the level of the essence of the soul or authentic self, nothing's missing in us. At the level of the existence of our senses, things appear to be missing in us. The things that appear to be missing in us are all the things we're too proud or too humble to admit that we have, that we see in other people. So as long as we envy them and put them on a pedestal and are too humble, we disown a part, we disempower ourselves. As long as we look down and resent somebody and are too proud to admit it, we disown parts. And anything that we try to look down on that we resent is actually something we're ashamed of and dissociated from and looking down on to avoid, and they're reminding us of what we don't love in ourselves. So the moment we own and reflect and have reflective awareness, instead of superordination looking down or subordination looking up, we have ordination where we have the order and the power in our life. You know, it was in Romans 2:1 in the biblical New Testament, it said, beware of judging, for whatever you judge in others, you do the same thing. And there's so much wisdom in that because we don't realize both the heroes and the villains on the outside are reflections of what we project from the inside. And once we comprehend that and own it all, we can't be a hero without being a villain. You know, Donald Trump's a good example. He's a hero and a villain to people. And you can't rise into power and be a very empowered person until you can embrace both sides of your life and not be in your amygdala addicted to one side trying to get rid of half of yourself. You got to embrace all sides of yourself, the hero and the villain, if you want to master your life. So I teach people how to own that, and the second they do, the playing field of opportunity expands immediately.
Wow. All right. So I was thinking of a fighter when you were talking about that. So I see like a UFC fighter goes into the ring, you know, does amazing things, super confident, super skilled. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So when I see that, if I'm noticing it, that means that I have that in me somehow.
Yes, but it's not in fighting.
Right.
Because that's not your highest value.
Okay.
It may be in presenting, it may be in transforming people's lives. Looking at your mission statement, it's about transforming people's lives. That's where you put in the hours, that's when you put in the practice, that's when you go get the mentorship, that's when you're in the ring day after day after day after day after day. That's where you are the fighter.
Okay.
And look at the fights. You're dealing with all the different things that you've had to deal with in the last few years, and that's your fighting ring, and you're up against the Goliaths.
Right. And when I recognize that, I get even more empowered. And then I do that even better because now I'm looking at myself as this great champion in my own arena.
That's it.
And then that levels the playing field. That brings me up.
That's it.
To where I thought that fighter was up here. I realized, wait a second, I am up here.
Nothing's missing.
Okay.
And the only reason why people play big or small is because of how much they're willing to own. Anything you disown that you see in others, which makes you compare them with judgments, you disempower yourself and play small. The second you own it all. See, when I first learned this is 40 years ago, when I learned this process, I said, why wait for people to push my buttons and be too proud or too humble to admit it? Why not just go to the dictionary? So I went to the Oxford Dictionary, English dictionary, the biggest dictionary with the thinnest little print, you know. I went there and I went and underlined every possible human behavioral trait. I found 4,628 individual traits in this dictionary. Gordon Allport had done this many years earlier, 35 years earlier, and he found 4,000, so the dictionary has grown. 4,628 individual traits that human beings have: nice, mean, kind, cruel, positive, negative, considered, inconsiderate, honest, dishonest, everything. I went through every one of those traits, and next to the trait, out in the little margin, I go, who is it that I know that I judge as being the most extreme example of this behavior? And I wrote out their name, little abbreviated names. And then I went in there and I took the time to go, now, John, go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating this specific trait, action or inaction, and where am I, when am I, who am I doing it to? I'm isolating in my episodic memories and my hippocampus the exact moments of when I did it, so I'm not just speculating, I'm seeing it.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.
Hi, it's Brian Rose from London Real. You probably know that we've just recently been re-platformed on YouTube after 25 months completely in the dark. The truth is, I really need your help. What I really need you to do is click on that subscribe button right now, like this video, and maybe even leave a comment or share the link with friends. We're really fighting against an algorithm that's tried to keep us quiet for so long. And the more subscribers we have, the more people watch our content, the better guests we can bring you, the better content, and we can continue transforming lives. We've been doing this for 14 years now. I want to do this for another 14 years, but I really need your help. So click on that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment, share this, and we're going to continue to bring you more and more great content. Thank you. Most people will never see this opportunity. Dubai luxury transformation projects have historically delivered 40 to 90% annual returns. That is incredible. These were once reserved only for insiders with access. I spent 15 years on Wall Street and I learned this: the biggest returns always go to the people who get the call first. Now, you finally can. We've just received a brand new project with major upside potential. Allocations move fast. Click the link, apply now, and speak to my team. This is your chance to see what others never will.